Welcome to Rambling with Resolveera. I know we have had a break and I hope everybody had a good summer and 1 month into the fall and school season. I believe everybody is kind of warming up for the rest part of the year. Now, around this time of the year, around the globe in many communities, this is a time of celebration, festivities, as you can see in my family too. And we do a lot of socializing, especially this year is important for many because people have not been meeting each other because of COVID in the past couple of years. And a lot of these celebrations and a lot of these festivities are actually around belief, traditions, culture, and faith. So today, in our episode of Rambling with Resolveera, we are actually going to talk about how faith has an impact on our individual as well as in a community basis, how it impacts our decision making, impact on our lives and important life-changing situations, especially on our mental and physical health and how that aligns into both. So today, our special guest is Dr. Rozetta Schaeffer. And Dr. Schaeffer, for me, she is Dr. S. She has been my mentor during my PhD days, and I really don't know how to, put words to introduce her. She is so big in our life. And frankly speaking, in our culture, they say you don't show a light bulb to a sun because the sun is so bright in itself. So Dr. Schaeffer is like that. Telling something about her as an introduction is like showing light to the sun. So I would ask her to introduce herself and to tell us about her work and how she is involved in the community. Dr. Schaeffer, welcome for Rambling with Resolveera, and I'm so honored to have you in my show.
Hi, Vera, thank you so much. I'm the one who's honored, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I've never quite thought of myself that way. Um, but I've been a social worker for many, many years, and then went on to get my PhD in clinical psychology, not because I didn't want to do social work, but because it gave me additional skills and additional understanding of depth in working with people who were seriously troubled. Um, at this point, I'm retired, um, at least from teaching, and at least from direct social work. I feel like I'm busier now than I was before. I, I'm currently sitting on the board of a couple of nonprofit organizations. I work directly with an international organization, Youthful Faces, which works with children and families in Kenya. And I'm also director of the youth ministry at my church. And that's probably the major portion of what I'm doing. I mean, here and there, I also may, just for fun, do some consultation when I'm asked. But in general, I'm doing volunteer work and feel very blessed to be at a point where I can now do the specific things that I would like to do outside of agencies, outside of universities, and only within the structure of what I believe and what I'm feeling. And it's a very good feeling to be at this point.
That's a very good segue to our discussion, Dr. Schaeffer, the way you said that what you believe and what you're doing, because today's episode is about faith and it is mostly about what an individual believes or a community together believes in traditions. Um, in our mental health work, we see that a lot of people, especially in diverse groups, we see that a lot of decision making is based on the culture. That's why we have cultural competency and trainings on cultural competency to have people understand what a client or a patient from a different community believes in and how the decision making helps. What do you see in your clinical practice? How is like how is faith the driving force behind physical and mental health and the decision making for individuals?
Hmm, a big question. We could talk about this for years.
I know, right?
um, but I think that, first of all, let me start with the practitioner's faith. Um, because that's the driving force in terms of our work with people. Um, and it is, at least for me, difficult to think about working with others without having a faith to always guide you and to fall back on in those times when you know you absolutely do not have an answer. You don't know um, what to do. But I think faith is the driving force because it is one's faith that defines what one believes, defines how we work with other people, defines the level of respect we give to other people. Um, it defines our awareness even of others as equal beings on this earth, regardless of what their situation is. The
Correct.
situation is temporary, and the situation is only important because it has an impact on the way the person lives in the world. But how we respond to that is related to what we believe and what we think about our purpose and place on this earth and how we should be interacting with other human beings. Um, I can only speak from um, my position as a Christian, which does not, in fact, define who I work with.
Correct.
It only defines how I, as a human being, work with other people. So I can work with anyone of any religious faith, of any standing. How I do that is dependent upon whether or not I truly believe um, that that other person is an equal partner in this. Even when it's frustrating, you can't help
Awesome.
the other
Yeah.
person to to um, do the work or can't get them past their depression to see that this may really be temporary, or can't help them to understand that there are other ways of disciplining your children, or if you work this hard in trying to use your skills and your strengths, you'll get more. You don't have to be involved in criminal activity. With all of that, I still have to engage with them as equal human beings and do it with a sense of respect and always with hope. I mean, that's the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
If if faith is the foundation and really does guide you, there is always that hope, which is why we keep working.
Yep.
Which is why we stay with it. Um, that's my short answer to it. I think that fundamentally, our faith defines who we are as human beings, what our purpose is. Um, and our faith is different, by the way, from religion. I don't think religion and faith are the same, although there's a connection.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, how one practices one's faith um, in every aspect of their life, including one's professional life, um, is dependent upon whether or not that faith is real and active, or whether or not one is practicing the edicts of a particular religion. And I think that there's a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Or whether one is practicing traditions,
Right.
you know,
Right.
or whether one is interpreting um, what their religious edicts in fact state. Uh,
Right.
and I think we constantly, as people, interpret so that we feel good about what we're doing.
Yes. Yes. It's like self-justifying our actions with the help of faith.
Exactly, exactly. But I think that if we're just saying, okay, I truly believe that this is another human being who has the same equal standing and some purpose, even though I or that person doesn't really understand it. I have to interact and engage with that person as if we're both understanding that, and with respect and with care.
Great. So this also leads us to the other side of the table, our clients, the people we interact with who come to us for guidance, for advice. Um, in because I work with a lot of South Asian community members, I see that most of my clients use a lot of faith-based belief, values, family values, individual principles in coping mechanism. Because I work with a lot of families who have children diagnosed with special needs. The very first thing after a couple of discussions about understanding the diagnoses and everything, somehow faith kind of like water, it just flows into the conversation.
Mhm.
And it turns out to be a coping mechanism, as I see, for a lot of families. And you work with a lot of families and children. So like I'm still your student, Dr. Schaeffer. So I, through this episode, I'm learning a lot from you while you're saying it. Like it's taking me back to our classroom where we used to quietly listen to your lecture and then process it. So I'm kind of again in that stage. So I really want you to tell us, tell our viewers, tell us listeners, and definitely me to start with the list, the coping mechanism people use when they're going through a very stressful situation. And for any parent, regardless of which area in the globe they live in, having a child with a special need or getting a diagnosis, it's very stressful and challenging. What do you see when you're working with the community? How does faith drive the coping mechanism?
I think that we're always looking for meaning. We need to explain to ourselves how this happened. What does this mean? You know, um, what am I supposed to learn from this? And we're also looking for the strength to deal with whatever the situation is. And that strength
Mm-hmm.
comes from our faith. It doesn't surprise me that you very quickly get into that flood of faith because that's literally what's carrying them along. When I think of the children and families with whom I've worked and children who have special needs, it always occurs to me that we have planned our lives and we've brought children into the world with a very clear definition and expectation of something we call perfection. You know, they're supposed to look a certain way, they're supposed to have a certain number of limbs, they're supposed to be able to move a certain way. And as they develop, we're supposed to see all of the perfection and the strengths, and very often in terms of what we ourselves don't have. We think we're supposed to be able to see that. We're supposed to be able to present to the world this perfect specimen of who I am. And when that doesn't happen, it's terrifying. It's like, what did I do wrong? How did all of this go wrong? You know, I did it the right way. How did it now go wrong? And one has to look for an explanation that will help them move forward, loving this child, struggling with this child, but loving this child. And loving this child through his or her life and finding the positives, knowing and seeing and dealing with what we call negatives, but finding the positives so they can continue to love this child and hold this child and care for this child. And I think when one does not have that faith, which really is the coping foundation, this is what you can fall back on. This is what will hold you and say, you know, this is a moment in time. In spite of, this is still what you have,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And although this child may not be perfect in the way that you think the child should be, this child is still perfect in terms of the human being that I made. And I've given you the strength, I've given you the skills to be able to go ahead and take care of this child. The interesting part of this, and I think probably also the greatest struggle, is being able to just, I think, relax into that in the midst of all the pain, because it is painful and it is terrifying. One of the most important um, things that I think that we as professionals can give to families, and especially families where there are special needs family members, or where there are mental health issues, is hope.
Mm-hmm. I was about to ask you, like in a clinical setup, how do we address this? Because um sometimes I feel that when we are in a session and I believe it happens to all of us as clinicians. Like at some point of time, it becomes very mechanical.
Mm.
Like here is the diagnosis, this is what it says, or this is, we kind of categorize things under headings and titles.
You know how I feel about diagnosis. And I taught mental health and use of our diagnostic tools for many, many years and love teaching it. It's important in terms of our um, professional development and provision of service to people. However, it is not the answer. It is only a tool. So once I have a diagnosis, I can say, okay, now I know the direction I'm supposed to go in, but it still doesn't tell me how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It still doesn't tell me what to do. It might help me understand what not to do. It doesn't necessarily, it doesn't give me the recipe for how I do this with this human being.
That's such
It
a
only
perfect answer
tells me
because,
I need the recipe.
mm-hmm,
It doesn't
exactly.
tell me, you know, we have to, with each individual human being, figure out what the ingredients are for that recipe.
So
You know,
to some extent, what it seems like, it's like the clinical practice when it really comes to, working with individuals, and it's again repeating what we keep saying but sometimes forget while we are practicing, is that one size doesn't fit all. Yes, there's a diagnosis,
absolutely,
but the service is custom made. you
exactly,
have to you have to shape your practice, you have to shape yourself as a practitioner based on the requirement and the belief system and the faith and the coping strategies of the person sitting opposite on the other side of the
exactly.
table.
Which then means we always have to know where that person is in terms of their faith and how they use it. I went to school many, many, many years ago, and we won't talk about how long, but it's a long time ago. But at a time when I think we were also being trained to be social workers differently.
Mm-hmm.
And social work was coming into its own at that point. I remembered two things that I was told very early on, and this was like in the first few weeks of school. One was you will always take yourself with you. It doesn't make any difference what agency you're working in, what kind of agency, who your client population is, or the age of your client population, or the other diverse issues in terms of ethnicity or culture. You will always be there as you. And your job is to figure out how do you do that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry so much about your clients because your clients are going to be who they are. In some ways, that's how they became your clients. But
Right.
you have to remember you're going to be you. So you need to know who you are. The other thing that was constantly said, I had a wonderful teacher, I think, although I don't remember this specifically, but my memory, which of course is distorted and feels like she started every single class telling us if it is important to you, assume it is also important to your client. And if it is important to your client, then you need to figure out a way to ask your client about it. And the best way is to ask directly. I don't think I've ever done an assessment in which I did not ask clients about their faith. It's because it's so important to me. And if it's fundamental to me, somewhere in there, this is a fundamental important piece for clients. For some clients, it meant that they were, I think, in some ways surprised that they would be asked, are you really using all that you have to cope with this situation? Or are you aware of all that you have to cope with this situation? For others, they were like, no, I've turned that off. Life has just been terrible to me. So, I just don't believe in that stuff anymore. And that stuff being religion.
Yeah.
That stuff being, which is different. For others, it was a reawakening. And out of that came a kind of restoration with their faith, because up to the point of their being in a situation that they absolutely could not control, they believed. And it was almost as if this was the doubting and the quickness with which we were willing to walk away was kind of a test of, do you really believe, and are you really going to use this? Are you really going to let it guide your decisions? Our clients, especially, I think, for those who have family members who suffer from mental illness, are people who are every single day struggling with the question of, do I believe? And if I do, how do I use this to get me through this day? Or sometimes, how do I get me through this minute?
Mm-hmm.
It's very different from, I was sitting back and talking about, well, this is what I believe and this is what it means. People are living it. And it is such an integral, important part of who they are and how they get through every single minute of the day, that they almost feel like, it's not there. I just have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
For people for whom this is truly a very active and aware part of their lives, know that this is getting them through the day. It gives them the hope to keep trying. It gives them the strength to keep trying. It gives them the patience to tolerate what in some instances is just an overwhelming trial. When you have people whose functioning as a result of their mental illness may include violence, may include behaviors that are just not understood,
So, Dr. Schaeffer, we have like about 5 minutes to wrap this up. What, as a clinician, as a social worker, would be your advice, your suggestion to the community when it comes to decision making in, like, with the capacity of what they believe in? What would you say to the community? What are your thoughts and advice to them? Tips? And when I say community, I mean both professionals as well as
Mhm.
the clients.
I think knowing oneself and understanding that the difference of someone having a special needs, whether it's mental illness or something else, that that difference is not a punishment, it simply is. I can't explain why it happened. I mean, I can tell you some specific things about what's going on in the brain and what may or may not be happening in terms of some diagnostic categories, but why we even have those categories, I don't know. Why some of us develop in one way and some in another way, I don't know. But know yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's going to define how you interact with people. For people who are not in that professional realm, well, one more thing I would say about professionals, always find out what your potential client believes. What's their faith belief? Where are they? How are they using that? How do they explain to themselves? How do they define the meaning for themselves of what's going on
Right.
in life? Um,
Like ask and not assume.
exactly, exactly. And ask directly.
Yep.
People will respond when you ask. If they don't tell you, then you need to ask. I think it's important enough that the same way we would ask someone when it's the last time you had a physical exam,
Mm-hmm.
that we ask them, maybe not in these words, but ask them when's the last time you had a spiritual exam?
Mm-hmm.
When is, when have you stopped to think about how you use your faith and what keeps your hope alive? What's the light?
And I think that's also like a tip to the community for people who are asking, like to be aware about what their driving force is.
Exactly, exactly. And one is not being punished because there's a mental illness. There's in every single faith. If we were to, and this, I'm going to make this controversial statement because I think it's an important one. I think in every single faith, if we were to truly study our books of religion, regardless of what the faith is, and then compare the behaviors of the people of faith with our current modern day diagnostic categories, we would find plenty of people who suffered from mental illness, which states what that those diagnostic categories are all about. They're trying to put together in a model the behavior so it can be understood. Okay,
Correct.
but it's not a punishment. My most important, and it has been for me, so I will share it with others, is to know that my most important gift has been to be able to keep hope alive for the clients by treating them as the way I would want to be treated, and by being available to them as another human being. I'm professional, yes, so I know how to use myself differentially, but we're two human beings on this earth moving in the same direction at this point, and we have to figure out what that direction is.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schaeffer. This discussion was like just awesome and so timely because the world in many different pockets is celebrating a lot of cultural, religious, and faith.
Yes.
And everybody's having like fasting, socializing, um, rituals that are like done on an annual basis. And this episode at this time is such a timely discussion. I mean, I believe our viewers, our listeners will be so happy to hear and learn so much from this discussion.
Thank you so much, Vera, for the opportunity to just have this um, conversation with you. And I would love this conversation to continue. And a conversation, I'm not the teacher here, just a conversation,
Absolutely.
because there's just so much to learn from each other, being able to talk about what's usually a very difficult issue to discuss, and yet it's such an essential part of who we are.
Right.